I was fired from my own company, the company I bled for, the company that was my entire life. They voted me out and locked the doors behind me. They thought they had everything, but they made one critical mistake: they forgot who wrote the original rules of the game. My company was called Helios. It was born from a simple personal frustration. I'm an avid hiker and camper, and I was constantly annoyed by the limitations of solar power. Portable solar panels were inefficient, bulky, and practically useless on a cloudy day. So I decided to fix it. I have a background in materials science, and I spent 2 years in my garage after my day job experimenting. I was on a quest to create a new kind of solar technology. After hundreds of failed experiments and a few small fires, I finally had a breakthrough. I developed a new paper-thin photovoltaic film that was not only twice as efficient as anything on the market, but could also generate a significant charge from ambient and even indoor light. It was a game changer. It wasn't just for hikers, it could be integrated into windows, clothing, backpacks, anything. It was a technology with limitless potential. I poured my entire life savings, about $30,000, into creating a working prototype. I built it myself, soldering components on my kitchen table until 3 in the morning. I called it the Helios film. It was my masterpiece. I knew I had something revolutionary. But I also knew I couldn't do it alone. I needed a team. That's when I found David Chen and Sarah Jenkins. David was a brilliant engineer I knew from college, a quiet genius who could turn my fragile prototype into a scalable, manufacturable product. Sarah was a charismatic marketing executive I was introduced to through a mutual friend. She had the connections and the salesmanship that I, as an introverted scientist, completely lacked. The 3 of us founded Helios. I was the CEO and Chief Technology Officer, the visionary. David was the head of engineering, and Sarah was our Chief Marketing Officer. In the beginning, it was perfect. We were a family. We worked out of my garage, fueled by cheap coffee and a shared, electrifying belief that we were on the verge of changing the world. I was the heart of the company. David was the hands. And Sarah was the voice. We complemented each other perfectly. We secured a small friends and family investment round, just enough to get us a real office space and start producing small batches of our first product, a sleek, ultralight power bank that could be charged by our Helios film. The product was a hit. The initial reviews were ecstatic. Tech blogs called it the death of the low battery warning. We were growing, but we were growing too fast. We were burning through our initial capital. We needed a real injection of cash to scale up our manufacturing and meet the exploding demand. We needed to go to Silicon Valley. We needed venture capital. That's when we met Patriot Ventures and its lead partner, a man named Gavin Croft. Gavin was everything you imagine a top-tier VC to be: sharp, impeccably dressed, radiating an aura of immense power and intelligence. He had a reputation for being a kingmaker, for finding early-stage startups and turning them into unicorns. When we pitched him, he seemed to get it immediately. He wasn't just interested in our power bank, he saw the bigger picture. He saw the potential of the Helios film itself. He saw the billion-dollar licensing deals, the integration into smart homes, electric vehicles, and even aerospace. He spoke my language. He mirrored my vision back to me, but made it bigger, shinier. "Jessica," he said in our final meeting, his eyes locked on mine, "you haven't just built a product, you've built a platform. This is one of the most exciting technologies I've seen in a decade. We want to be in the Jessica Miller business." I was completely starstruck. This man, this legend, believed in me. Patriot Ventures offered to lead our series of funding round with a $10 million investment. It was an incredible valuation. It was everything we had ever dreamed of. But there were conditions. Gavin wanted 2 seats on our board of directors. He also insisted that we bring in a more experienced executive team to help us scale. He wanted a new chief operating officer and a new chief financial officer, people from his network who had done this before. I was hesitant. It felt like I was losing control of my own company. But Sarah and David were ecstatic. They saw the money, the validation, the chance to finally become a real player. They pressured me, telling me I was being paranoid, that this was just how the game was played. Gavin reassured me, "Jessica, you are the soul of this company. You will always be the CEO. This is just about giving you the support you need to succeed." So I agreed. I signed the term sheet. And in doing so, I unknowingly signed away my own kingdom. The first 6 months after the funding were a whirlwind. The new executives came in, both slick, polished guys from Gavin's world. The company grew at a breakneck pace. We hired dozens of new employees. We moved into a massive, glass-walled office in Palo Alto. From the outside, we were a rocket ship. We were the darlings of the tech press. But on the inside, the culture was changing. The family atmosphere was gone, replaced by a cold corporate efficiency. Meetings were no longer about brainstorming. They were about hitting metrics. The company that I had built on passion was now being run by spreadsheets. And I was being slowly, methodically pushed out. It started with small things. Gavin and the new COO, a man named Mark, would have pre-meetings before the actual board meetings, where all the real decisions were made. I was never invited. My role as CEO started to feel purely ceremonial. Mark would handle the operations. The new CFO would handle the finances. And Sarah, my own co-founder, started aligning herself more and more with Gavin and the new team. She loved the new corporate environment, the power lunches, the expense accounts. She started talking about shareholder value and burn rates, words that had never been part of our vocabulary in the garage. She and David, swept up in the glamour of it all, started to see me not as their leader but as a sentimental creative type who was holding the company back from its true potential. Gavin's strategy became clear. He wasn't interested in my long-term vision of sustainable, accessible energy. He wanted a quick, massive exit. He started pushing to license the Helios film technology to the highest bidder, a massive, soulless electronics conglomerate, and pivot the company away from our own consumer products. It was a move that would make the investors a fortune, but it would gut the soul of the company. It would destroy the very reason I had started it in the first place. I fought back in board meetings. I argued passionately for our original vision. I presented data showing the long-term value of building our own brand. But I was stonewalled at every turn. Gavin, Mark, and the other board member he'd installed would vote me down. Sarah would abstain, looking uncomfortable, refusing to meet my eyes. David, my brilliant engineer, would just stay silent, intimidated by the powerful men in the room. I was the CEO, but I was powerless. They treated me like a mascot, a figurehead they had to tolerate because my face was on the About Us page of the website. They saw my passion as an obstacle to their profit. The breaking point came during a tense board meeting. Gavin proposed a formal plan to sell off the exclusive rights to the Helios film technology. I called it what it was, a betrayal of our company's mission. I refused to sign off on it. Gavin just looked at me, a cold, pitying smile on his face. "Jessica, you created a brilliant thing. But now it's time for the adults to take it from here. You're too emotionally attached. You can't see the bigger picture." The next day, he called an emergency board meeting. I wasn't invited. My assistant, who was still loyal to me, tearfully told me what happened. The agenda was a single item, a vote of no confidence in the CEO. Gavin, his board partner, Mark the COO, and the CFO all voted to remove me. Sarah and David, my co-founders, my friends, the people who started this journey with me in my garage, they abstained. Their silence was their consent. It was a public, formal execution. I received a call from the company's new lawyer an hour later. He informed me that I had been terminated as CEO of Helios, effective immediately. He told me that security was on their way to my office to escort me from the building. I was to have no further contact with any employees. I was fired from my own company. When I got to the office, my access card had already been deactivated. A stoic security guard met me at the door. He escorted me to my office, where my personal belongings were already packed in a sad brown cardboard box. Mark, the new COO, was there, his expression unreadable. "Gavin and the board feel this is for the best, Jessica," he said, as if he were talking about the weather. "We'll be in touch regarding your severance." I walked out of the office I had built, past the employees I had hired, carrying a box of my own life. I saw Sarah and David across the office. They couldn't even look at me. They just stared at their desks, their faces full of shame and cowardice. In that moment, the heartbreak was absolute. It was a betrayal on every possible level. They hadn't just taken my company, they had taken my dream, my friendships, my identity. They thought it was over. They thought they had won. They thought I was just a scientist, a naive founder who didn't understand the brutal realities of business. They had forgotten that before I was a scientist, I was a planner. They had forgotten that I was the one who, with my first lawyer, had drafted the original founders' agreements, the very documents that formed the legal bedrock of the entire company. And buried deep within the legalese of my own personal founders' agreement, there was a clause, a strange, complex little clause that my first lawyer had called unconventional, and that Sarah and David had signed without even reading carefully. A clause that Gavin and his high-powered legal team, in their haste to close the deal, had completely missed during their due diligence. It was a clause I had designed as a last resort, in case of emergency, break-glass measure. It was my kill switch. A back door to my own kingdom. It was called the Founder's Reversion Clause. And it stated that if I, the original inventor of the core technology, was ever removed from my role as CEO without a cause that involved gross negligence or criminal activity, a very specific sequence of events would be triggered. It was time to pull the trigger. I went home that day, and I didn't cry. The shock had frozen the grief, turning it into a diamond-hard point of clarity and purpose. They had made a fatal miscalculation. They saw me as a creator, an artist, someone driven by passion. And they assumed that meant I was weak, that I was naive about the brutal mechanics of power. They had completely underestimated me. I let them have their victory for one full week. I let them believe they had won. I watched from a distance as Gavin appointed Mark as the new interim CEO. I saw the press release they issued full of corporate double-speak about my decision to step down to pursue other creative endeavors. They were already rewriting history, erasing me from my own story. Sarah and David even sent me pathetic guilt-ridden text messages saying they were so sorry and that it was out of their hands, as if they were merely spectators to my execution and not silent accomplices. I ignored them all. My silence was my sanctuary, the place where I was building my war machine. While they were busy congratulating themselves and popping champagne corks in my boardroom, I was meeting with my lawyer. My real lawyer. The sharp, cynical man who had helped me set up the company in the very beginning, the one who had questioned my unconventional clause. When I walked into his office, he already knew I'd been fired. "I saw the news," he said, a grim look on his face. "I'm sorry, Jessica." "Don't be," I said, placing a copy of my original founder's agreement on his desk. "I think it's time we reviewed Section 7B subsection 4, the Founders' Reversion Clause." He picked up the document, a slow smile spreading across his face as he read the lines he had once cautioned me against. "Oh, Jessica," he said, looking up at me with newfound respect, "you magnificent paranoid woman. They didn't even see it, did they?" "They saw a scientist," I replied. They didn't look for a strategist. The clause was my masterpiece of legal engineering. It was incredibly specific. It stated that if I were to be terminated without cause, and their press release about me stepping down was a public admission that there was no cause, then the ownership of the core intellectual property, specifically the patents for the Helios film technology, would not remain with the company Helios Incorporated. Instead, the clause triggered a reversion. The IP rights would automatically transfer to a separate dormant holding company that I had established years ago and that I alone controlled. This holding company was named, with a touch of irony, Garage Innovations LLC. Essentially, Gavin and Patriot Ventures had invested $10 million not into a company that owned a revolutionary technology but into a company that merely had a temporary license to use it, a license that was contingent on my continued leadership. By firing me, they had activated the self-destruct sequence. They had, with their own vote, turned their $10 million rocket ship into an empty powerless shell. They had fired the soul of the company and in doing so had legally and automatically given the soul right back to me. So what's the plan? My lawyer asked, his eyes gleaming. We can send them a letter tomorrow morning and watch the chaos unfold. No, I said again. That's not enough. They didn't just fire me. They humiliated me. They tried to erase me. I want them to feel the same powerlessness I felt. I had a different kind of theater in mind. Gavin's big plan is to sell the exclusive license for the Helios film to that electronics conglomerate, right? Let him. Let him get all the way to the finish line. The plan was simple and devastating. We would let them operate under the illusion that they still own the IP. We would let them negotiate their massive company-making deal. Gavin was so arrogant, so sure of his victory, that he would rush the due diligence. He would never think to re-examine the fine print of the founders' agreement of the person he had just vanquished. For the next 3 weeks I did nothing but watch and wait. It was the most nerve-wracking period of my life. Every day was a risk that someone on their legal team might discover the clause. I saw news trickle out about the impending deal. Helios Inc. in late-stage talks for historic technology licensing deal, the headlines read. Gavin was hailed as a genius, a visionary VC who had successfully restructured a promising but unfocused startup for maximum profitability. He was taking credit for my life's work. And I let him. I let him build his tower as high as it could possibly go. The day of the deal signing was a major media event. Gavin had arranged for a press conference at a lavish hotel. The CEO of the massive conglomerate, a man named Mr. Thompson, flew in on his private jet. The stage was set for a triumphant announcement. This was Gavin's victory lap, the moment he would prove to the world that his brutal cutthroat methods were the key to success. My lawyer and I didn't go to the press conference. We went to Mr. Thompson's hotel suite an hour before it was scheduled to begin. We had arranged a private, urgent meeting with him and his legal team, telling them there was a critical time-sensitive issue with the intellectual property chain of title that required their immediate attention. We sat in a sterile hotel suite across from 3 of the most powerful corporate lawyers in the country. They looked at us with impatience and annoyance. This better be important, one of them said gruffly. We are about to close a 9-figure deal. Oh, it's important, my lawyer said, sliding a single folder across the table. This is a copy of the founders' agreement for Helios Inc., along with proof of Ms. Miller's termination without cause. I draw your attention to Section 7B subsection 4. For 10 minutes the only sound in the room was the rustling of paper. I watched as the faces of these high-powered lawyers went from annoyance to confusion to disbelief, and finally to sheer abject horror. One of them finally looked up, his face pale. Is this real? He asked, his voice a choked whisper. It is 100% real and legally ironclad, my lawyer replied. As of 3 weeks ago, Helios Inc. has had no legal right or title to the Helios film patents. They are wholly owned by my client's holding company, Garage Innovations LLC. The company you are about to pay hundreds of millions of dollars to owns nothing but some office furniture and a brand name. They are selling you a car with no engine." The silence in the room was absolute. The lead lawyer immediately picked up his phone. "Get Gavin Croft on the phone now." Downstairs in the ballroom, Gavin was on stage schmoozing with the press. He was at the absolute zenith of his power. His phone buzzed. He saw it was Mr. Thompson's lead counsel, and assuming it was a celebratory call, he answered with a smug grin. I can only imagine the conversation that followed. I can only imagine the feeling of his world turning to dust. The realization that his grand victory was a catastrophic, humiliating failure. The press conference was abruptly cancelled due to a last-minute scheduling conflict. Gavin Croft and his team were seen leaving the hotel, their faces ashen. The deal was dead. But I wasn't finished. The next morning, Helios Inc. was in chaos. Their stock in the private market was worthless. Their investors were in a full-blown panic. Their 9-figure deal had evaporated. They were a company with no product and no future. That's when I made my move. Through my lawyer, I sent a letter to the Helios Inc. board of directors. I offered to rescue the company. I proposed that my holding company, Garage Innovations, would grant Helios Inc. a temporary non-exclusive license to the Helios film patents under one condition, that the entire current board of directors, including Gavin and his partner, resign immediately and that a new board be constituted with me as the chairperson and with board seats given to David and Sarah. It was a checkmate. They had no choice. If they refused, the company would be liquidated and their entire investment would be wiped out. If they accepted, they would be publicly humiliated, forced to hand control of the company right back to the woman they had fired. They chose to save what little they could. They resigned in disgrace. My first act as the new chairwoman of the board was to call a meeting with my two co-founders, Sarah and David. They came into my old office, now my new office again, looking like they were about to face a firing squad. They were broken, ashamed, and terrified. They started with pathetic, rambling apologies. I held up a hand to stop them. I'm not interested in apologies, I said, my voice cold and even. I'm interested in lessons. You two forgot what we were building here. You were dazzled by big money and powerful men and you abandoned the soul of this company. And you abandoned me. I slid 2 documents across the table. These are your new employment agreements. Your salaries have been cut by 30%. Your board seats are non-voting for the first 2 years. You will no longer be C-suite executives. You are now a senior marketer and a senior engineer. You will report to the new CEO. Who's the new CEO? David whispered. Me, I said. You will report directly to me. You will work to earn back your position in this company. And you will work to earn back my trust. Or you can leave. The choice is yours. They both signed without a word. They chose to stay, humbled and broken. The power dynamic had been completely and irrevocably reversed. They thought they had fired me from my own company. They thought they had taken everything. But they underestimated me. They forgot that I was the one who built the foundation. And in the end, I didn't just take back my company. I took back my power, my vision, and my soul. And I did it by letting them hang themselves with the very rope they thought they were using to tie me down.